Good evening, everybody. This is Double Crossed Radio. I'm your host, Chuck Horton, and I'm coming to you live from the USSA FEMA Region 10. Tonight, we're going to talk about some different things. I'm going to talk about kind of a update on a show we had not too long ago about cashless society. We're going to talk about the post office being reinvented by Congress. And we're going to talk about some nonsensical radio news people. And possibly, if we have time, we'll have an update on the things that are going on in regard to the BLM and their assault on the ranchers of the West. And so try not to talk too much about the death of Lavoy Finicum, as who in my mind was murdered by it was a task force of FBI, Oregon State Police, and county sheriff deputies. And this was from Harney County. And as more and more evidence comes out, it appears that the FBI was either they got out there to fake a news conference where they purposely misled people by saying something was a fact when they didn't know what the truth was, or maybe they did know what the truth was and they were trying to mislead. But just for truth's sake, Lavoy Finicum was not shot 2 or 3 times. He was shot 9 times, and he never ever held a gun in his hand during the entire episode. He was standing with his hands up, and he may have been taunting them, but I don't think telling people, go ahead, then shoot me, is a reason to shoot a man dead in cold blood. So I just, and to this point, Governor Kate Brown in Oregon has not released any comments on this issue. She has not asked for the people at the Oregon State Police involved in this to be suspended with pay while they investigate the killing. She has not. The state police is her. They serve at her purview. I don't know the right word. Her pleasure, whatever. They do what she says. She is in charge of them. She's kind of the commander-in-chief of the State Police of Oregon. No word from her office to this point, but we do know that she still is pressing for more gay rights, so that she still is on the job. She isn't just hiding somewhere. Certainly has her priorities kind of askew from the rest of the world, but you go, Governor Kate, as far away as possible, please. But I'm bump. Okay. First story tonight is the update on the previous show we had. The continuing demonization of cash was recently an article that we posted on our Facebook page. It was penned by Paul Martin Foss, and it was published on the Mises Institute webpage. And you might remember that Eric Dubin and I had a really good discussion about what a cashless society might look like and some of the problems that we saw with that possibility. I mean, certainly there would be some conveniences, but there's also just along with those conveniences come just this whole landslide worth of abuses and making it real easy for people to be corrupt and not get away with it, to steal your money, and seeing the sorry state of affairs that most banks find themselves in. I mean, there's no way they have 100% of their depositors' assets in the bank. A healthy bank, a bank that's deemed to be really solid, probably has around 10%, maybe 20%, if they're having trouble making loans. But back to the story. I'm going to kind of read from this because I think it's very short, and I think he summed up the whole thing in very well in just a few paragraphs here. The insidious nature of the war on cash derives not just from the hurdles governments place in the way of those who use cash, but also from the aura of suspicion that has begun to pervade private cash transactions. In a normal market economy, businesses would welcome taking cash. After all, what business would willingly turn down customers? I mean, that's kind of what we're there for, right? It's to serve. And actually, a cash transaction is pretty easy to record, whereas the bank card transactions with the new chips in them, they take much longer, slow us down, require more manpower, be diverted to that task and less to the other chores that are out there to be done in the business. So it's not a good allocation of resources, in my opinion. But back to the story. But in the war on cash, that has developed in the 30 years since money laundering was declared a federal crime. Yeah, did you know that? That until 1980, money laundering was not a crime. There's probably some reasons for that. Maybe we'll do a show on that in the near future, the history of money laundering. And by the way, I think that as long as money laundering is a crime, and we should have a full-time deputy or detective or somebody following Hillary Clinton, because she is just a criminal. But it doesn't matter if they catch her, because nobody has the guts to go after her because of all the FBI files that she has stored on all the politicians in Washington. There's so many heads that would roll if she went down. Actually, it would be a joyous thing for me, but a lot of people in Washington are just scared shitless of what she might turn up on them. They don't know what information she has on them or whether she even has information. They just assume she does because they know she has at least as many as she's been fingered as having. And who knows how many other files she has. So anyway, she seems to be bulletproof, but we'll see. Anyway, it was declared a federal crime. Businesses have had to walk a fine line between serving customers and serving the government. Tell me about that one. That's kind of what I do on a daily basis. And since only one of these two parties has the power to shut down a business and throw business owners and employees into prison, guess whose wishes the business owner is going to follow more often? Yeah, you got it. It's where we know where our bread is buttered. The assumption on one part of the government today is that possession of large amounts of cash is indicative of involvement in illegal activity. If you're traveling with thousands of dollars in cash and get pulled over by police, don't be surprised when your money gets seized as suspicious. And if you want your money back, prepare to get in a long, drawn-out court case requiring you to prove that you came by that money legitimately. Just because the courts have decided that carrying or using these glasses are not the right ones for reading this. I should have printed it in bigger type. Just because the courts have decided that carrying or using large amounts of cash is reasonable suspicion that you are engaging in illegal activity. You see that? They don't have to prove you've made a crime anymore. You have to prove you're innocent. And that is kind of turning our legal system upside down. Hal Anthony, whose show just preceded my show, I would like to have him on sometime to talk about this. This is really injustice. Because of that risk of confiscation, businesses want to have less and less to do with cash. Even legitimately earned cash is subject to seizure. And we've posted many stories. We've talked about some of these stories online, and we've talked about some of them on the show. People own small businesses. They keep cash on hand to pay for things. They're on a cash basis with their suppliers. They pay their employees in cash. They pay their withholding deposits in cash at the bank or whatever. They put money in their bank account to pay their withholding deposits, an electronic transfer process that the government uses now. But they like to keep their money in cash because they don't trust banks. They think they've been, maybe they're immigrants and they've been in countries where banks just kind of suddenly went out of business and they lost money. Or maybe they read the newspaper and they know something about economics and they realize that the banking system that we have is just totally flawed and it has what they would call panics back in the 19th century, which now means runs on the bank. and they don't have the assets to pay all the depositors back. But anyway, restrictions on the use of cash are just some of the many laws that pervert the actions of a market economy. I would say, use a stronger word than pervert, that distort is probably a better word for that. But rather than serving consumers, businesses are forced to serve the government first and consumers last. Businesses act as unpaid tax agents, collecting sales taxes for state governments, paying excise taxes for the federal government. In my case, working as we have to also check IDs, we have to prevent the sale of alcohol to minors, and tobacco to minors. We have to. There's a lot of things we have to perform on an unpaid basis for the state, and they contend that some of the money that they pay us we live in a controlled liquor state, so the state owns all the liquor. So some of the money they pay us as a commission to sell their liquor is for these other services that we provide. But and that may be true. I'm not going to argue with that. I actually don't think that minors have the wherewithal to really have an informed consent, and so there's no such thing as a voluntary exchange when a minor's trying to buy alcohol. But that's just me. But there's still a lot of other things we have to do. We collect income from our employees to deposit to the federal government as a withholding tax for their taxes, stuff like that. I really, that's a federal thing that we do, and we don't get paid a dime for that. So, anyway, financial institutions, which include coin dealers, jewelers, casinos, are required to report cash transactions above $10,000, as well as any activity the government might deem suspicious. Man, I'm telling you, $10,000 back in 1980, when this became all illegal, was a larger sum of money than it is today. I mean, you could buy an awful lot more with $10,000 in the 80s than you can buy today. When this first became a crime, gold was less than $100 an ounce. I used to, in 1980s, in the early 80s, I used to go and get $20 out of the ATM, and I would eat lunch on that $20 all week. Now I can eat lunch on $20 maybe 2 days. So, you know, $10,000 was a lot of money. Today, not so much. Cash becomes such a hassle that is almost radioactive. Many businesses would rather not deal with the burden. Using cash to buy a house is becoming almost impossible, and it's probably only a matter of time before purchasing a car with cash will become incredibly difficult also. And I want you guys to know that there should be nothing wrong with paying cash. Think about it. That's a freedom you have. It's an anonymous purchase. And while you're buying a house, it's not that anonymous. It's going to be recorded on a deed and all that sort of thing. And a car is going to have a title to it. So those are not so much anonymous. But just about everything else you buy, if you're paying with cash, it makes it anonymous. And some of the things, I mean, who cares if it's anonymous or not? But it's your life. And you should have the right to determine if someone else has privy to that information or not. In other words, when you use bank cards or use an ATM card, debit card to buy something, that information now becomes valuable to the people who want to sell you stuff. And all of this, I mean, it's incredible how much information like that changes the way things happen to you with the world of the internet. Now, 2 years ago, my wife and I went back to Poland to visit her family. And we were going back, and it's kind of a long flight, about 16 hours. But as I'm kind of a Words with Friends junkie, and I was playing some Words with Friends, and at that time I didn't have the version that you can just play. I decided lately, after a while, I got tired of all the ads, so I just ponied up the $8 or whatever it was, so I wouldn't have to watch the ads. But on the way to Poland, we flew from where we live here in Southern Oregon, FEMA Region 10. We flew to FEMA Region 9, San Francisco, and took off from there for Poland. And in the airport in San Francisco, as we were getting ready to go on, some of the ads started to switch to, I'm kind of waiting for my flight. I'm playing Words with Friends, and some of the ads on my iPad started changing from English to Polish, and they were ads for, Mercedes-Benz, for, it was incredible that I was being solicited already. That information had already gone ahead, preceded my trip, and was now part of what I was receiving in the ads that came along with that game that I was playing. And so that information, like I said, it becomes valuable to people. And I just, that's one of the reasons why I just stopped the ads for that thing. Is I just got tired of every time I was engaged in some kind of activity, suddenly I would have ads that were associated with that activity. And I thought, man, this is too much. And I think probably that information is still out there. I'm just, I don't use any other mediums that they're able to assault me with these ads. But this is how unprivate our lives are. Well, just think if private, captains of industry are able to get this information and use it to their advantage, use it to try and get you to buy their products. Just think how useful this information is going to be to government. They're trying to entrap you in a crime, or to find out if you're paying all your taxes, or to see if you're spending more money than you should be on the income that you make. And they're certainly if this information is being sold to people in like I said, private enterprise industries, certainly they'd be willing to sell it to other people who might use it in a different manner. And so I'm really thinking that cash is kind of a thing. I prefer to purchase things with cash whenever I can. When we get paid at the beginning of every month, my wife and I always take out a large sum of money that we use to buy our groceries and our own personal expenses, and we kind of parcel it out week by week so we don't spend it all in the first 2 weeks, and that's kind of our budget. And if we run out of money, then we get some more, because we're leaving quite a bit in savings. I believe in the pool of savings. And we're also trying to use that to accomplish some other financial goals that we have. And I really try and use cash, and I always try and spread that message every time I buy something with cash. It says, I'd say, you don't mind if I pay with cash, do you? It's one of our last remaining freedoms. I prefer to exercise it whenever possible, almost making it feel like they're really an asshole for not taking my money if they'd prefer I would use a card. But I've never had to experience that. I find most businesses actually prefer the cash, because I'm not talking about buying stuff that's going to put them over that $10,000 mark and make it something they have to file a form when they go to the bank and make a deposit or something like that. It's just, we're usually talking about purchases that are less than $2,000, and most of them are less than $1,000. In fact, most of them are less than $100. But it still is a matter of your own personal privacy, and we should be able to it's the Fourth Amendment right that we need the privacy that's accorded to us by the Fourth Amendment in our persons, effects, and belongings and whatever, and that's part of it, being able to use cash. So, anyway, this was a good article. I find that the Mises Institute is a great source of information, and some of the articles are more for the professional economists. Some of them are more for the people just interested in it. And some of them are practical applications of economic law. Some of them are maybe like this one, something that's just a kind of a political statement or observation that was really interesting. I find that about 80 to 90% of the things that are written and published in Mises.org are just awesome. And even the ones that aren't, I usually learn something from the ones that are really hard to understand, and the ones that are kind of sometimes I think they miss the mark once in a while. Well, no one's perfect. I mean, I'm not going to stop going there if I find a weird story about every third month or something. That it's really a good place. I really recommend it to all of you guys. Especially, we might be coming on a period of time. 2016, it's been said that the Supreme Court has the votes, and someone puts the right message out there. They're going to have more stringent enforcement of intellectual property, which means that a lot of the things that you see, you're going to have original content. You aren't going to be able to share articles from one place to another. So if you need to find original content, this is a place that has original content. They're not going to be violating any intellectual property laws, and so it's always going to have the truth. They report on things that are true, they're not somebody else's hearsay or whatever. They're scholars. Most of them, they're almost all of them, I think, are, and they're PhDs in economics and history, and it's a great site. Okay, second subject for tonight, and this is also I'm violating intellectual property laws right and left today. This is from our friend, although I don't think he knows he's our friend. But I've never met the man. My brother has, but I think he's an amazing guy. Simon Black. And The Sovereign Man is the name of his website. It's another one that I suggest you. Although a lot of the things that he posts for free are kind of something to get you interested, make you think about things that he offers services for that you might be interested in. And certainly there is nothing wrong with that, because you get some great historical insights, some great economic insights. You get some great financial advice for free, and just think how much the stuff that he's not willing to give away for free must be worth if the stuff that he gives away for free is great. So I took the bait. I now am a member, and I think it's awesome. Anyway, this is from the free part, and you might want to, if you think if you think this is coming from the Onion and not from Simon Black, the Sovereign Man, you're wrong. This is real life. This isn't the Onion making something up. It seems that Congress has passed a new act. It's called the Providing Opportunities for Savings, Transactions, and Lending. The acronym for this is POSTAL. Yes, the post office is going to be converted into not only a letter delivery service, letter and package delivery service, but also a financial institution. They're going to be engaged in the business of banking. Oh, happy day. I can just imagine this. I think that someone should do a kind of a comedy film clip about this. David, if you're listening tonight, I think this would be really funny. Someone goes into the post office and he wants to put some money in his account, and he has to take a number, and it's number like 10,751. And he goes, "Oh wow, I wonder what number they're up." And he looks up on the wall and he sees now serving number 7. And there's one guy at a teller's machine, and there's 4 people. They're kind of standing around talking to, drinking coffee. And he's standing there, and then the person finishes their business and they leave, and then he goes, "Now serving number 8." And someone gets up and walks over up to the teller, and one of the other people glances at their watch, puts down their coffee cup, and comes over, "Now serving number 9." And then the guy that was number 8, when he's done with his customer, he closes his teller thing and goes back and gets a cup of coffee and starts talking with these other guys. I just think it'd be funny, because that's kind of how it would look like, just like going to the DMV. And you'd be there, and you need to get this transaction done, and it'd be like, you get there at 4 o'clock, and you've been there in line for an hour, or you've been waiting for an hour, and "I'm sorry, we're now closed. We cannot do any more transactions past 5 o'clock. You'll all have to come home. We open tomorrow at 10 a.m. And you go, "I didn't even get within 100 people of my turn. What? We can't do this. We can no longer." It's just, that's how it would be. I doubt they could compete with a private enterprise. The post office is already a company which in the last several years has gone, let's see, since they started operating in the red, which was only a few years ago, I think maybe it may have been, I think I started noticing it in the 90s, so it'd be maybe 20 years. The last 20 years, they have run in the red a total amount of $51 billion. And this would rank them as possibly the least successful company in the history of the world, to have had losing years for 30 some odd consecutive years, losses totaling over $51 billion, and they're still in business. So that, I guess they're succeeding at something. The one thing that has been their saving grace has been that every year when they have to report to the legislature, they come there with their hat in their hand and they say, well, it just, we've hit our debt ceiling and we need to have, what we have these payroll liabilities, and we didn't realize that things were going to be this expensive, and so there's not enough money there. You guys can take that. So the legislature takes on the liability from all their payroll things for their employees, and now they're not on the hook for that. It makes their books look better. It looks like they're actually doing something, but they're not. They've just saddled on some of their losses to the United States taxpayer. But this is a really funny little article, and it's kind of a scary thing when we're looking at a cashless society, post office, being engaged in that business, and even if they did a good job at the counter, that information would be a straight pipeline to all the intelligence agencies in the United States, the NSA, the CIA, the FBI. They would know exactly everything you were doing all the time. And with the new programs that they have, things are at such a point where there's some of the companies claim that they can anticipate your order. They can have it boxed up and ready to ship before you even place it. That's how good these computer algorithms are in predicting your behaviors. Just keep that in mind, that probably having a government entity serving as your personal bank, as your personal banker, just remember, loose lips sink ships. So oh, we have a little second thing going on there. Anyway, back to other things. I wanted to go over some things that this was going to be kind of the main part of the show today, but because I wasn't sure how much material this would last, it's just something that occurred to me a couple days ago, and I thought, oh, this would be interesting to discuss on the show. And so I spent most of the day doing the research for this, and I realized this probably is not a whole hour's worth of material. So that's why I had those first two in there. Back in August, I was reading something. I get up every morning about 3 hours before work, and I spend about the first hour kind of reading stuff that's happening, news, analysis. It's kind of a grab bag of what I do. I don't have any specific things I go to read. I try and make it varied. And back in August, I had read an analysis. This was from, I think this was from CNN. And they were trying to explain the slumping stock market, and they were blaming its troubles on Donald Trump. I says, well, I got to find out. That was the headline. So I have to read this because this doesn't make any sense. And actually, the story didn't make much sense either. The rationale stated in the story was that his anti-immigration policies and poorly thought out trade policies would be bad for America, and thus that was driving the stock market down. Now I want to stay here that I'm not a Trump fan. I think that's been clear in the shows we've had regarding the primary season. I don't agree with him 100% on anything, certainly not on immigration and international trade. But in August, Donald Trump would not have even been to one primary yet, and suddenly his rhetoric was, we're supposed to believe that his rhetoric on these things was driving the stock market down. I'm having a hard time with that. So, at the time I kind of laughed as well, that's stupid. But then I got to thinking about it a little bit more over time, and I realized maybe there's a lot of people out there that don't want Trump to be president, so they're going to blame everything bad that's happening on him right now to try and demonize him. Now, certainly things like that happen. I mean, and I have to say that his immigration and trade policies probably would be bad for American business. So, however, there's other things about him that would probably be good for American business. So I'm not sure that they would balance out or be a net positive or net negative. Only time would tell on that. But I really have a hard time believing that would make the stock market go down just because he got on TV and shut his mouth off a little bit. So, Donald, I don't really have your back, but on this one, I thought they were being really unfair to you. Okay, now we'll fast forward a couple of months to October. Stock market is continuing to slide down. And now the finger of blame has been shifted to China. And the rationale here was that the economic slowdown in China was having such a negative effect on producers of trade goods that it was affecting the stock market price of these companies' stocks. In other words, China doesn't produce everything it consumes. It actually engages in trade, just like every nation. Although they run trade deficits with a lot of nations, they probably have a net trade surplus. They send out more than they bring in. And that's how it is. The one thing that a lot of people don't realize in terms of things that are being produced is there's never a net surplus or deficit in trade because cash is always part of every trade. I mean, people are paying for something; they're trading dollars for the products. In other words, when I go to the butcher shop and I buy a steak, I don't have a steak trade deficit because he doesn't take something in trade from me. He takes my dollar, in this case, my $8.95. But and the butcher doesn't have a trade surplus because he is accepting the dollars in exchange for that. So it's balanced trade. I mean, that's how trade works. So that's another myth that's out there that's just totally baffles me. But their rationale was that China was not importing enough stuff anymore because their production, the call for Chinese goods was slowing down around the world, and that was the fact that they weren't importing as much stuff from around the world, and that included the United States, that the stock market in the United States would go down because the U.S. companies were not, that trade thing was kind of not working out as well for them. Now, this, again, seemed to me to be beyond belief. All this time, the story on China, up until that time, the story on China had been that they're making everything, and the trade deficits caused by purchasing so much stuff from China were becoming a huge problem. And so the slowing down of the trade between China and the rest of the world should be having the opposite effect if these guys were correct. If the trade deficit with China was such a big problem, this would seem to be lessening that deficit, and it should be helping our economy to revive, not get worse. So one of those two statements that had to be wrong. And who knows? We'll go on with all that. In my mind, it was that China's economy was more of a bubble economy than anything else, but even so, it shouldn't have a big effect on the U.S. stock market. It should have an effect. It should be small. China doesn't buy that much stuff from us. Then I got to thinking, well, maybe there is a way that could negatively affect things. What if the American banks were heavily invested in the Chinese stock market? They could be losing their shirts. And all of a sudden, I started to realize, maybe there is something to that They just don't want people to go too deep in there because they don't want to shake confidence in the banking industry. So maybe this, just they edit the stories out so that no one can really figure it out. But eventually, if you think long and hard enough about it, you can find a reason why it might be that way. That doesn't mean it is, but that was my thought on that. And in January, our stock market began a series of sharp declines, and the finger of blame this time swung to oil. And I talked about this as a lead into one of the preceding week's shows, and I just thought, what the hell? Lower energy prices should be a boom for that should be a good news for your economy. It shouldn't make the stock market go down. How could low oil prices be causing the market to go down? Well, here is the reason, according to the analysts. He said that the oversupply in oil was not because more oil was being discovered. It was because the demand for oil had lessened to such a great extent that the price had dropped by over 50%. In fact, today, right here in FEMA Region 10, Southern FEMA Region 10, gasoline was being sold for under $1.80 a gallon. Woohoo! I think that's good news. I like that. And this lessening demand for oil is probably worldwide. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's all in the United States, or just the United States economy could still be fairly reasonably strong if we didn't have so many other factors involved in this. Okay, so I did my research. And I was pretty much just confirming what I already believe. But it very well may be that the lessening demand for oil around the world, and I want you to know that one of the largest consumers of oil around the world is China, and their economy is hitting the fan. So that could be of a huge impact. But again, this does not necessarily mean that the U.S. economy is going down, but we'll get to the real reason here in a second. What really happened was, just like in The Wizard of Oz, someone pulled the curtain back. Someone uncovered the real truth that, hey, all this Keynesian quantitative easing and stuff doesn't work worth a shit, and the falling prices of oil are exposing all these fake economic numbers that are being circulated around the world. We really don't have nearly full employment. We really don't have no inflation. In fact, the falling oil prices would actually help to support that number of no inflation, but they're not falling because we have excessive supply. We have insufficient demand because worldwide the economies are crashing. I'll say again, worldwide economies are crashing. So if everything was as awesome economically as Obama the liar stated in the State of the Union speech, the drop in oil prices would have led a stock market rally, because it would have meant that in a real, you have a real economy where energy is bid for like all commodities, and falling prices would signal more efficient energy usage or new discoveries of oil or alternative energy sources providing renewable energy at competitive competitive costs, and these all would have been good news. But none of those things happened, at least not significantly so. The drop in the stock market is real, and I, for one, wonder how it reached the highs that it did. Well, I really don't wonder that much. It's obvious that the endless monetary easing, whether otherwise known as money pumping, was the only thing holding the market together. Now, if you're a stockbroker, you probably think that was a good thing, but it wasn't, as we're about to see. All it did was create a bubble, which is an unsustainable economic trend by anybody's definition. It's only supported by the money created out of thin air, and Money created out of thin air isn't real. And so this isn't really, it's like a bubble that's out in space where there's a vacuum and there's just a little bit of air in there, so it kind of maintains its shape, and it can even grow a little bit larger if they supply a little more material to it. But as soon as it encounters the atmosphere, it'll collapse. Re-enters the real world. But it does a lot of damage. It does damage by attracting money from a lot of places that have real money instead of the phony currency supplied by the Federal Reserve. And we call this malinvestment. People are earning more than they spend. They're taking their savings and, well, they can't put it in the bank these days because what are you going to get? A 0.1% interest? Woohoo! Where are you going to spend all that cash? Or they could buy some stocks, and that stock market seems to be going up and up and up. And it's pretty easy for a stockbroker to talk someone into, I think you should get into this sector and you should kind of diversify. You should have a lot of eggs in your basket. And they say a lot of cliches that sound reasonable, but they're whether they're doing this consciously or they've just been taught these things in a sales seminar, I tend to believe the latter. There's a few guys I've talked to that really understand what's happening. They have trouble looking their clients in an eye and telling them something they know isn't true. And so they say, well, I'm not sure if I'd do that. If you want to, I'll go ahead and place the trade for you. But they're pretty honest about it because they want their clients for long-term basis. So I think it's mainly they've been trained to say those things. And anyway, that adds to the momentum of a market going up with people kind of pouring their money into it. But it gets to a point where there's no longer any reason. I mean, they're buying the stock of companies that aren't making very much money, if any at all. And they're saying, wow, this is valued so many times over earnings. That's kind of a lot, isn't it? And the number of buyers starts to decline. And here's another thing that's a fact about the stock market. Every time someone buys a stock, someone sells a stock. In other words, there's another person on the other end of the transaction. When the buyers outnumber the sellers, the price goes up. Because there's more demand for the stock than there are people willing to sell it until the price rises to a level where there will be an equal number of sellers and buyers. It will stay at that price until that number of sellers and buyers changes, either so that the sellers outnumber the buyers, which would cause it to go down, or the buyers now outnumber the sellers again, and then the price would continue up. So at some point in time, the actual numbers that the company is producing become obvious to a lot of people, and the number of people who are willing to buy the stock starts to decrease, and the number of people willing to sell the stock tends to increase. And the sellers soon outnumber the buyers, and the stock, and we're talking about just one company, will start to go down. For the whole sector, for the whole market to go down, not every single company's stock goes down, but most of them do. For that to all to go down, it means a lot of people are they have their eggs in a lot of different baskets, and they're suddenly realizing that this is a hoax that's been put over on them. And they're trying to get out of the market. And there's also a lot of people, even a greater number of people, that realize this is a hoax. And they're taking advantage of it by starting to sell short. I mean, they're selling a stock that they don't own. And they will buy it back later to complete their trading, so they'll be netted out at zero. But they realize it's overvalued. And the number of sellers, they call this a bear market, when the sellers outnumber the buyers. And the sellers drive the market down. And when it gets down to a low enough point, they'll buy their contracts back, and the market will look like it's having a rally, and it'll rally back, sometimes over 50% of its decline. But it will never reach a new high because those sellers come back into the market and they force it back down again. In the meantime, the investors, should we sell now? When it gets down to its lowest point, they want to sell as well, and it helps drive it down a little lower. And then it starts to rebound when all the sellers complete. They say, on my trade, I made my money. I'm going to buy out my sale position. And it starts to come back up. And all those other people that were they were getting out of their buy position, they have their wealth destroyed by and large. So as that dead cat bounce comes up to a certain level, which is always going to be less than the previous high, all those the investors, they just lost that difference, and the sellers now re-enter the market and drive it back down to probably a new low, because they'll gather a bunch more sellers from the buyers who are becoming scared. And it continues to do this. You can look at the stock chart records for the crash in 1929. They had a one-day fall off, and then a dead cat bounce, came back up. It didn't make a new high, and then it went down again to a new low and back up, but did not create a newer high from the old high. And it just kept doing that, going up and down, up and down. And some people who were good investors, they made a lot of money on that as in a bear market. And you can if you know what's going on. But that's what's happening right now. And this market's going to look like a saw blade going up and down and up and down and up and down, but it's never going to make new highs. It's always going to be making new lows until it fails to make a new low. And then it can go back and forth in a trading range, and they call this a fulcrum, and it'll come to a point where it'll have to either break up on the upside or on the downside. And depending on what the economic realities are, excuse me, it will do one or the other. And, I'm not going to predict the future. I don't know who it is, but I think for right now it's going to go down for a while. When the trend has started, and it's been started way back in the late summer, early fall, is a downward trend. And the trends tend to stay in that direction until there's a reason for it to reverse and go the other way. And that's just how it is. So, as we look at these three reasons again, the bubbles, the first thing was from Donald Trump, but I'm going to do that one last. The Chinese economy, the bubbles are formed from unrestrained currency creation that's not sustainable, and we should expect that eventually to crash the whatever market it's being, it's being used in conjunction with, so that market rallies funded by monetary expansion will collapse. That's just a law. It always happens. And the second thing was we were talking about oil. And this isn't having to do with oil, but it's just something that I've held as a truism, is increasing government control and regulation at a significant cost to almost everything produced in this country, which in turn makes imported goods more competitive. It also leads to fewer jobs being created in this country, which in turn leads to decreasing demand for everything imported from China. So this is something that we should expect when we've added cost to the manufacture of goods that we now import from China. We used to make here ourselves. They're no longer made here because of government regulations. We have to do there's between the EPA and the state environmental protection organizations that have done nothing to protect the water in Detroit and are lead poisoning children by the thousands. But those organizations sure make it tough on anybody wanting to open a business, and they have to clear some land, or they sent a guy in Florida to jail for dumping sand on his own property because they said it violated a wetlands, and they dumped it on dry land. So I don't know where they got this wetland thing. Anyway, all of this regulation, all the taxation, all the hoops that people have to jump through here, they don't have to jump through in other countries. So some of the things that were being produced here are now moved to other places to be produced. And the major benefactor of all this was China. The fact that the Chinese economy is crashing means, A, that they've been underselling their products, and they really need to sell them for a higher price, which doesn't surprise me. The communists still control that place, and they don't really understand how markets work. they're trying to copy free market practices because they realize that the West generates a lot more wealth than they do, but they haven't quite figured it out yet. They still think, they're still kind of in control. So their prices were kind of artificial. And so that really was a legitimate concern that it wasn't expressed very well in the story because they certainly don't want to say something derogatory towards communism. But the fact that the Chinese economy was going in the tank is really kind of serious news for American companies. We are also in that we are not competitive. The fact that they were more competitive, but they still weren't even sustainable, means that, oh my gosh, what's happening here? We have a similar kind of bubble here. Our supposed recovery wasn't really recovery at all. It was just money created on computers it's just zeros and ones on a balance sheet and somebody's program. That money doesn't really exist at all. It could vanish in a heartbeat with just, if people come to realize that it isn't real, then it's not there anymore. And so I think that's a real concern that there's more and more investors in Wall Street. And these guys are pretty smart. The big money is the people that are running those things. They understand that stuff a little bit. They understood it when it was going up. They knew that this day was coming. And they knew that this is the day. So I think that was probably a legitimate story, just wasn't explained very well. And it made it look like what China does when China, has a runny nose, or has a bad cough or something, the rest of the world catches a cold. That wasn't really, it shouldn't have been stated in that respect, but that's an editor putting his opinion into things. He really doesn't know very much about economics or trade, and it really was legitimate truth there that, that's something we should be concerned about. It's kind of probably going to happen here as well. And the last thing was one we led off with was about Donald Trump. Well, protectionism is a part of Donald Trump's presidential plan if he gets elected. And protectionism is a disaster. It was such a measure. It was actually legislation called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, and one of those people was a representative from Oregon, I'm ashamed to say. I think it was Mr. Hawley. That was one of the precipitating events that led to the Great Depression. It started a trade war, international trade war, which was kind of an offshoot of the currency war that had been going on. And so there's a lot of ill will being put out there between people because governments were interfering with trade instead of letting people voluntarily exchange goods and services for other goods and services. And so it developed into a currency war and then a trade war, and then they passed more government regulation to try and fix it, and they made it worse. So in investigating these issues much more deeply, I found that each one of them, they were rooted in the truth, but by the time they got broadcast on the radio, they were so laughable. I mean, like these people, do they even understand how stupid what they're saying sounds? Let me see how much time we got. About 5 minutes left. So I'm going to devote the remaining minutes of this program to the memory of Lavoy Finicum, who's murdered on Tuesday, January 27th, on a remote highway in eastern Oregon. And it was an ambush, assassination. It was set up to get him and to get, to probably wanted to kill a couple other guys too, but they surrendered before they could do it. Or maybe they were in a part of the highway where they still had a little bit of cell signal. But Lavoy happened to, they shot at his truck and he took off. And he went into an area where there was no cell service. And they had actually shut down a 60-mile stretch of that highway. This was a United States Highway 395. They shut down a 60-mile stretch of that highway, and they forced him into this roadblock. They came up behind him real fast and made him go faster and faster. They knew there was a roadblock ahead. They didn't need to make him go faster. But they encouraged him to go faster and faster. And he comes around a corner and sees there's a roadblock, and he puts on his brakes, and you can see that in the film. But he's not going to make it. He's not going to stop before he crashes into him. So he swerves off to the left side of the road, and he tries to go around them, and he's in a snowbank, which snowbanks are pretty common in the mountains in eastern Oregon, and the snow plows go through. They just kick the snow up on the side, and it kind of builds up. So it's probably where the deepest snow is right there, and then the first 3 or 4 feet off of the side of the road. And his truck was in there and became stuck. In fact, after he lay dead on the snow, the rear wheels of the truck were still moving. They just weren't, no traction there. And I've watched that movie many, many times. I've seen other people point out things about it. The one thing that I think was really an amazing point was something that David Knight reported on InfoWars. He had been talking to a law enforcement person. He said that kind of a roadblock, the way they made it there, it was a very aggressive move on their part. It's something that forces somebody into an action that they can call aggressive, and they can return fire. In other words, he comes around a corner, he's going too fast, he's going to crash into him, and they're going to just empty every bit of ammunition they have into that truck, which they did anyway, eventually. It's a miracle that the other 4 people in the truck, or the 3 people, in the truck, didn't die. And Ryan Payne, I guess, had got out of the truck and been arrested at the first stop. And, in hindsight, maybe Lavoie shouldn't have taken off, but the police were shooting at his truck. And I'm reminded of an incident that happened in Medford, Oregon. There was a young man who had walked away from a work program, and he was basically it was a work release thing he had unknowingly committed assault on a federal officer. I don't know exactly what it was. It was supposed to be a drug bust or something. And he thought it was just he didn't know that the guy was working undercover. He didn't know he was a police officer, and he beat him up. So anyway, they just landed on him hard and retaliated. They got all his buddies in there, and they beat him up pretty bad. They put him in this prison, and then he had walked away from a work release program, and they found him in a parking lot of a grocery store in Medford, and they came up and they just kind of had him boxed in and said that he tried to leave, but he didn't, and they shot about 40 rounds of ammunition and killed him. They were out to kill him.